We are Routes y Raíces. My name is Jennifer, and I have my co-host with me,
Kimmy Abduli. Hello, everybody.
All right, so what are we here for? Today we are going to provide you with a brief episode on mandatory detentions. Why? Because there has been a lot of shift, and in a positive way, I think, towards those who are currently detained or have been detained for months.
Yes, super brief background on it just to kind of get everybody caught up on it in case people don't know. There was a shift last year when the new administration came in which anybody that was being detained by ICE and being placed into removal proceedings, if somebody was here undocumented or entered without inspection, they were being held in custody, mandatory, no bond permitted. And that's been a major shift in how this has been applied historically, that usually people can apply for a bond. I mean, there are a couple of things that might make you ineligible for bond that did require mandatory detention before. But generally, assuming you don't fall into that mandatory detention category, you would be able to request bond and potentially get it so that you can pay your bond and then do your proceedings while not in custody. With this new shift, it's basically keeping everybody detained and making it so that none of them qualify for bond. And it's been a very weird interpretation of the statute is kind of how they've been getting around and excusing this behavior. That's why you've been hearing about the large influx of writs of habeas corpus being filed. It's been because of this mandatory detention policy. Kind of been a huge thing over the last year, and it's been litigated in courts in every circuit, and now we're getting more and more decisions on where circuits are falling on that.
Right. And so even to add to what Kimmy was saying, the mandatory detention was a shift in interpretation of the statute because, as she said, there were requirements to those who would fall into a particular category for mandatory detention. But just because you entered without inspection didn't mean that you fell into that category. Right. Well, to add to a layer to this mess, the BIA came out saying that immigration judges didn't have jurisdiction to even hear bond hearings. Right? And so what happened was because immigration judges didn't have quote unquote jurisdiction, all these habeas cases, as Kimmy was saying, were being filed with federal court. So essentially immigration judges were saying, no jurisdiction, I can't even hear this issue.
Let me just say the BIA is, I don't even know if I can say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. They have been for at least the last year full of shit. Just put it bluntly. Yeah. Like they just come up with some literal, like really just bullshit and then make up some weird excuse to justify the bullshit that they just came up with. And it has nothing to do with the actual law.
Right. The interpretation of the government in arguing that these people, specifically people who entered without inspection, are subject to mandatory detention is wrong. It's inaccurate, and it's been read the same way, meaning these people are eligible for bond.
Right. Like that's been the standard operating procedure, is that they are eligible for bond. Again, unless they fall into that very narrow mandatory bond classification. The fact that they have entered unlawfully does not automatically put them in that category. That's been standard protocol for the last 3 decades.
Right. So where does this leave immigration judges? Well, immigration judges are saying, I don't have jurisdiction to even entertain a motion for a bond hearing, right? They weren't even listening to those cases. So what happens is circuit court judges, federal judges, are being, what's the best way to...
Inundated.
Right.
Like flooded.
With cases. I mean, flooded with cases all over the country. And what's very interesting here is that a lot of these judges who are Trump-appointed judges at that have ruled against DHS's position, counsel's position, counsel for the government's position, and in favor of the respondents. So what happened then? When the judges were ruling in favor of the respondents, there was an appeal. These federal cases at district levels were going up to Court of Appeals. And so what has that led to? Well, an entire mess. But it's favorable to respondents. Why? Why do I say that it's favorable to respondents? Because 3 Court of Appeals have ruled in favor, meaning that if you enter without inspection, you are not subject to mandatory detention, unless, of course, you fall into that category of mandatory detention. 2 are in favor of the government right now. So we have a split of 3-2 division At the appeal level.
At the Circuit Court of Appeals level, yeah. Something to note about that is that people who are in those circuits, it means that the law is going to be applied to them differently. So if you're in one of those circuits that says that the mandatory bar does not apply to people who entered undocumented, that means you can apply for bond. And if you're in a circuit that said no, that person still can't request bond.
So how does this affect me personally if I'm listening to this and I have a family member or I have an acquaintance or I have a friend who is stuck in detention without bond, right? If you fall in the Second Circuit, the Sixth Circuit, or the 11th Circuit, meaning if your friend, family member, acquaintance is detained in one of those circuits, they will be eligible to ask for a bond. Then they can no longer say, no jurisdiction. Now they have to listen to the case, and it'll be subject to their decision based on what the Court of Appeals ruled, obviously. So just so listeners can understand what circuits they fall in. Second Circuit would be Connecticut, New York, or Vermont. The 11th Circuit, which was the biggest surprise because the 11th Circuit, the Court of Appeals, is one of the more conservative ones in the country. And they ruled in favor of respondents, and those states are Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and the Sixth Circuit, which is Kentucky, Michigan, and Ohio and Tennessee. So again, if your friend, acquaintance, whatever is in Connecticut, New York, Vermont, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, or Georgia, they can request a bond hearing. They are no longer subject to the government's interpretation of mandatory detention. Will it be granted? It's up to the immigration judge, but they can ask for it. The circuits that are in favor of the government's interpretation of mandatory detention would be the 5th and the 8th. The 8th kind of shocked me, but the 5th is Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, and the 8th is Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. I guess it's not really shocking, but Minnesota kind of like is in there with a bunch of other conservative
With all
states.
the problems they had, that's crazy.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, I'm saying.
Oh, right. So unfortunately, if you're in one of those states that I just mentioned,
mandatory detention still applies.
Detention applies, but that doesn't mean that you can't file a habeas. You can still file a habeas.
Right.
You just will not be eligible to even seek file a motion for hearing. Right.
At the immigration court level.
At the immigration court level. So as you can see, it's a 3-2 split. Now there's one circuit that there's one circuit that wanted to just make it even more complicated than it already is, and that is the lovely 7th Circuit. We had a split 3 ways.
We're in the 7th Circuit.
Yes, and we're in the 7th Circuit. That is Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin. The panel was 1 in favor for respondent, 1 in favor for the government, and 1 that just decided to not opine. So they kind of just...
I didn't even know you could do that. I thought the whole point of having
a 3-panel judge.
A 3-panel judge or like an odd number of judges is so that you don't have ties.
Right. So that's...
and we still got a tie. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, that's a tie. So it's really unclear as to whether you can ask for bond or not in those cases. But from what I've been reading, it looks like you could still ask for bond, and you're up to the mercy of the judge at that point. They can just deny it.
It's not a no.
Yeah, it really isn't not a no, and it's not a yes. So yeah, we kind of just wanted to touch up on that episode because there's been people who have been detained for months because of this new interpretation of the law that they just pulled out of nowhere. But obviously, circuit court judges had a backlog of habeas cases, and I think the Court of Appeals, given that the 11th Circuit, which is one of the most conservative courts, came in and said, nope, we're not doing this, it was kind of like, I feel like it was kind of like a slap on the wrist of the immigration judges, like, do your work.
Don't make us do your job for you. Like, we got other shit to do.
Right.
Why are we having to deal with your fucking mess?
Right. And I think I really think that's what
fair.
it was.
Yeah.
And so inevitably, this will at some point go before the Supreme Court of the United States because it's split.
It'll be interesting.
So
but
we'll
there's
see
still
what
a few
happens.
circuits that haven't decided.
But
like the 9th is a big one.
Yeah.
And,
the 9th is a big.
We don't know what the 9th is good to do.
The 9th did stay the circuit court judge that came down with like the hammer, and she did like the nationwide relief, and then the 9th came and stayed that.
Mm-hmm.
Stayed that order with the exception of Central District of California. But they are going to decide this pretty soon. And I'm optimistic, given that the 11th decided in favor of respondents, I'm optimistic that the 9th will too.
Let's hope.
So yeah, if you guys are in those circuits, in favor or not in favor.
Just FYI.
FYI.
And we'll update you when we know more.
Yeah, so good luck. And if you have any questions, you can email us at routsthepod@gmail.com, or you can simply comment, subscribe, like, let us know what topics you would like to talk about. there's a shift in policies when it comes to immigration all the time. So we try to keep as up to date and keep you as updated as possible.
Yes.
Until next time. God
Until
bless.
next time. Bye.
Bye bye.